From the studios of ITN, the news with John Suchet.
Good evening. The government tonight demanded a crackdown on video and TV violence, spurred on by the appeals for a safer society by the headmaster's widow, Frances Lawrence. The Home Secretary has ordered the film and video watchdog body to make changes to toughen up its act. And the Heritage Secretary is asking TV bosses, both BBC and ITV, what can be done to cut down on violence. Our political correspondent Hugh Pym reports.
The government crackdown involves demands for significant cuts in video and television violence, ministers calling on the video industry to take their share of responsibility and demanding a review of policy by the British Board of Film Classification. The clear aim to stop videos like natural-born killers getting into circulation. The decision to give it an 18 certificate caused widespread concern, according to Home Office Minister Tom Sackville. His department's announcement this afternoon received a guarded response from the video industry.
I'm a bit worried about that because I think that the consumers don't know that video already is the most restricted medium in this country and the most restricted industry in the free world.
And asked Labour why has it taken so long for ministers to come up with any proposals for action.
The public should say, if Mr Howard and Mrs Bottomley feel so strongly about these issues, why is there no proposed legislation in the Queen's speech to deal with it?
It seems, though, this is part of the government's response to issues raised last month by Frances Lawrence, widow of the murdered London head teacher, since when both the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have indicated their concerns about television violence. Hugh Pym, ITN, Westminster.
Next, on the early evening news, the riding school, 12 pupils are to be expelled. Boris Yeltsin's surgeons say the operation went well. And going home to Little Rock, is it a rock-solid victory? Within the last few minutes, it's been announced that 12 pupils are to be expelled from the riding school in Halifax. Another 23 will be suspended. We go live now to Tony Barnes on the phone at the school gates. Tony, can you tell us what's happened?
Well, John, a few moments ago we heard that the new headmaster, Peter Clark, is to permanently exclude 12 pupils and then exclude a further 23 for a fixed period, but we don't know yet how long that will be. Teachers had demanded that 60 be excluded before that. The school is likely to open tomorrow morning, and staff, pupils and parents are at the moment in the process of being told. Now, that doesn't mean for certain that the threat of strike action by teachers is over, but their union leaders today have been saying that they were hopeful of being able to avert a strike. The Ofsted report into the school is expected to be delivered to the governors tonight.
Thank you, Tony. The future of the leaders of the world's two superpowers rests tonight in a hospital room in Moscow and in ballot boxes all over America. President Yeltsin faces the crucial test of his health. He had his heart operation today. President Clinton faces a crucial test of his popularity. Voting ends this evening. That in a moment. First, our Moscow correspondent, Julian Mannion.
It began like a military assault. At 5:30 a.m., a convoy of limousines carrying the Russian president swept out of the sanatorium where Yeltsin has been resting. The destination, the Chazov Heart Clinic, where behind a tight security cordon, the surgeons started work. The Russian team was led by Dr. Rinat Akhchurin, seen here operating on another less eminent patient a month ago. Today's operation took 7 hours and was more complex than predicted. The president's heart was stopped for 62 minutes, and the surgeons installed many more bypasses than they expected 3 or 4, though they won't say how many. Afterwards, Akhchurin declared the operation a success, and the American cardiologist who's been advising him said Yeltsin will make a full recovery.
I would predict that President Yeltsin will be able to return to his office and carry out his duties in a perfectly normal fashion.
At the clinic, Yeltsin's wife, Naina, expressed relief, but still seemed worried.
I don't know how it will go, but at the moment, we hope everything will be all right. All the family is very worried.
Boris Yeltsin is said to have regained consciousness, but the next 48 hours are crucial. It's after that period that predictions can be made about his future as president of Russia. Julian Mannion, ITN, Moscow.
Now the US election, Bill Clinton is clear favourite to win a second term, but Bob Dole is still hoping to cause an upset. ITN has correspondents in the United States following both candidates. Bill Bill Neely's with President Clinton in Little Rock, and James Mates is watching the Dole camp from Washington. First, this from Bill Neely.
He ended his last campaign where he began his first one at home in Arkansas, at the electoral front line, wooing the voters. Nearby, his aides were already celebrating. There were tears in his eyes throughout the final push, the wave wearier, the president emotional that a lifetime of campaigning is over.
I am now speaking at the last rally of the last campaign I will ever run. We need you.
To the end, he was optimistic and inspiring.
This is a very great country. Its best days are still ahead.
Y'all ready for this? Every appeal, every rally, upbeat and geared to get out the voters, to give Mr. Clinton the landslide he wants so badly. 4 years ago, more people voted against him than for him. Today, he craves affection and a strong vote for a second term.
Your vote will decide.
The world's most powerful nation is now choosing its leader. Its president has been ahead in every single poll for a year now. There is no sign at this moment that the real poll is any different. Bill Clinton is coasting to re-election. Bill Neely, ITN, Little Rock, Arkansas.
The final hours of what seems certain to be his final political battle. Bob Dole has done what he promised to do, fought to the bitter end. This time he may be a loser, but he's no quitter. His last stop before going home to his native Kansas was the town of Independence, Missouri, home of the late President Truman. Curious that a Republican candidate should stand under a statue of a Democrat president. But to American eyes, Truman has become something of a patron saint of underdogs. Back in 1948, everyone, newspapers included, said he'd lost to Thomas Dewey. In fact, he'd won.
I look back at the statue of Harry Truman. I remember the headlines in 1948, Dewey elected president. I never met President Dewey, but I did have the honor of knowing about President Truman. We're going to do it again.
But that was then. Opinion polling has come on a bit since 1948. To the end, he has appeared inexhaustible. In a few minutes' time, he will cast his vote in his hometown of Russell, Kansas. Then candidate Dole will begin his final journey back to the nation's capital. James Mates, ITN, Washington.
We speak now to both our correspondents. First, Bill Neely in Little Rock, Arkansas. Bill, the mood there must be pretty good.
It's euphoric, John. What's at issue here is not whether Bill Clinton will win, but by how much. And the final poll puts him ahead by 51% to 39%. That's a 12-point margin of victory, and that's a landslide. The weather here is good. That will help the turnout and help Mr. Clinton. He was celebrating on Air Force One last night, toasting his aides and allegedly dancing the Macarena with Hillary Clinton. And there is every reason to believe that he will be celebrating here tonight behind me, where he first celebrated 4 years ago the defeat of a president, George Bush. He will now be celebrating the high point of his political life, the first Democrat to be re-elected president in 60 years.
Thank you, Bill. To James Mates now. James, is there an acceptance there that Bob Dole has lost?
Oh, in private, yes. I've been with the Dole campaign for most of the last 10 days, and frankly, a week ago they knew the battle was lost. They've had to keep up the public front because there are also these vital races for Congress going on. The whole of the US House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate are up for grabs. 2 years ago, the Republicans won control of those, and they're desperate to keep hold of them so that they can restrain and control, as they see it, a re-elected and reinvigorated President Clinton. They believe that he moved to the right. He stole many of their clothes in order to get himself re-elected. They want to make sure that they can keep him there once the election is over through the next 4 years.
Thank you, James. Pakistan's Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto is under virtual house arrest tonight after the country's president sacked her and her government. He said it was because she was corrupt. Imran Khan, the cricketer turned politician, supported the sacking, the second time Benazir Bhutto has been sacked in 6 years. Caroline Kerr reports.
The news that Benazir Bhutto had been sacked brought crowds onto the streets in celebration. The woman who was once seen as the champion of democracy had little popular support today. Pakistanis found out that she'd been fired when they read this morning's newspapers, and the most common reaction was approval.
I think it is very good in the interest of the people and the country.
Benazir Benazir Bhutto is the daughter of a political dynasty. Her father was hanged in 1979. Now she stands accused of corruption and nepotism. Last night her husband, who's been implicated in scandal before, was arrested. A caretaker prime minister was sworn in this afternoon, and new elections are promised for February. Today, the former cricketer Imran Khan, who's now one of Pakistan's most popular politicians, welcomed the sacking.
I feel that the decision to dismiss the government by the president was absolutely correct, because the government had failed completely, politically, morally. In every way, the government had become ineffective.
It's the second time Benazir Bhutto has been sacked for corruption. She's expected to fight the decision in the Supreme Court. Caroline Kerr, ITN.
Some news just in. Within the last half hour, it's been reported that 6 dangerous inmates have escaped from a prison service minibus. They were being driven from Suffolk to jails in London. The 6 who were handcuffed overpowered 5 officers, then ran off. 4 of the officers are now in hospital. The prison service has called it a regrettable and extremely serious incident. The family of a boy killed in a fireworks accident last week appealed to the government today to tighten up the rules on fireworks sales. As thousands of people prepare for bonfire night, Dale Mitchell's aunt told ITN she hoped his death wouldn't be in vain. Hal Jones reports.
Joan Mitchell will not be celebrating bonfire night tonight. A little over a week ago, her nephew Dale Mitchell died after fireworks were pushed through the letterbox of his home in Nottingham.
Dale suffered nearly 60% burns to his body. He was completely brain damaged. I can't think of a worse way to go. To think of a young child struggling, fighting for breath. I'd like to see the government give strong attention to the regulations regarding the import of fireworks where there's little licensing.
After 2 other firework deaths this year, most people are playing safe.
Well, doing it at home is too dangerous, and what's happened over the last few days, doing it for organised display is much more safety for the kids especially.
There are some simple safety rules to follow tonight. Look for the British standard mark on each firework. Read the instructions carefully. Read by torchlight, not by a naked flame. Use 1 firework at a time and never go back to a firework once it's been lit. Howell Jones, ITN.
Millions of gallons of water are on the move in Iceland tonight. The flooding is a delayed reaction to last month's volcanic eruption, which happened under Europe's biggest glacier. Bridges have already been swept away and roads cut, but the rising water is not thought to be threatening any towns. England has a new rugby union captain. Phil de Glanville, who plays for Bath, is taking over from Will Carling. Both men are centres, which means Carling could now be fighting to stay in the team. Here's our sports correspondent, Graham Miller.
Will you please welcome the new captain of England, Phil de Glanville.
His teammates call him Hollywood because of his movie-star looks, so the Rugby Football Union gave him a Hollywood-style entrance. The 28-year-old led Bath to the League and Cup double last season, but despite his form, he's never been able to dislodge the pairing of Carling and Guscott in the England team. So now he's replaced him as skipper. He could well have ended Carling's England career altogether.
I don't know what the team is going to be. I really need to sit down with Jack now and talk about the team, which will be announced tomorrow. So at the moment, I've no idea who's going to.
As a selector, will you be asking for Will Carling alongside you?
Well, that's going to be between me and the fellow selectors.
If Phil de Glanville stays injury-free, he should be a Twickenham regular between now and the 1999 World Cup. Graham Miller, ITN Sport, Twickenham.
News at 10 tonight comes from the United States. Trevor McDonald is there.
I'll be presenting the program live from here in Washington with the very latest on the race for the White House. Can Bob Dole rescue the Republicans, or is Clinton already home? Our correspondents are with both candidates as their future and America's is decided. Join me tonight at 10.
The main news here is that the government has announced a crackdown on TV and video violence, and Boris Yeltsin has regained consciousness after a...
For Drop the Dead Donkey, this is HTV.
From Washington and London, News at 10 with Trevor McDonald and Julia Summerall.
Clinton heads for victory and a historic second term. Enough is enough, sweeping crackdown on video violence. Yeltsin's trial of strength after marathon operation, and prisoners on the run following a motorway hijack. Good evening from Washington, where all the signs are that Bill Clinton has won the race for the White House. But voting is still going on across the United States, and the big question will be the president's margin of victory. Any victory would make Mr. Clinton the first Democrat since Franklin D. Roosevelt to win a second term. Mr. Dole, the Republican challenger, fought on bravely, claiming right to the end that he could win. What is certain is that the Reform Party candidate Ross Perot failed to make a breakthrough. Our Washington correspondent Bill Neely has followed the president's campaign from the beginning, and this is his report.
Are you optimistic, Mr. President? Optimistic, and with good reason, for as he prepared to vote, Americans were already confirming what opinion polls have said for a year, that Bill Clinton will beat Bob Dole to become the first president of the 21st century. After months of campaigning, celebrations with his family, and scrutiny of the exit polls, his spokesman told me a short time ago, Mr. Clinton is on the verge of victory. Even as he returned home, his aides were celebrating at the end of a 7-state final day push. All the indications tonight are that he has won all 7 of those states.
Your vote will decide.
But the hurdle he has set himself is to win 50% of the overall vote. Exit polls show that's still in doubt.
We need you.
To the end, he urged Americans to vote in large numbers.
This is a very great country. Its best days are still ahead.
In fact, fewer than 1 in 2 Americans may be voting. But tonight, the president who so craves affection, who has run an almost perfect campaign for re-election, is getting his way and clearing his path back to the White House for 4 more years. Bill Neely, News at 10, Little Rock, Arkansas.
Bob Dole's expected here in Washington any time now, after voting in his home state of Kansas. Our diplomatic editor, James Mates, has been following his marathon campaign. James, what's the secret to the fact that Bob Dole kept fighting right to the end?
Trevor, I've been with the Dole campaign for most of the last 10 days. I can tell you that a week or so ago, they knew this battle was lost. They had to press on with the campaign. They had to carry on with plans for a big party here tonight. Firstly, in the hope of a miracle. Secondly, because more than the White House is at stake here. Most members of the United States Congress are also up for re-election. Those battles are vitally important to the Republicans. They are why I think the 73-year-old Robert Dole fought on to the end. He visited 18 states in just 4 days, but the final stop was back home in Russell, Kansas, to cast his vote and almost certainly to bring a long and distinguished career to an end. He emerged from the voting booth with his wife Elizabeth, a loser maybe, but certainly not a quitter. Americans may have decided that at this time he was not the man to lead them, but the stamina and determination he has shown in this campaign will allow him to leave the political scene with characteristic dignity.
So we've had a long and uplifting journey across America. We've given our all, but with a full heart, and we're ready now to go back to Washington, D.C. and get ready for the victory party, right?
It's unlikely even he believes that. Across the continental United States, polling booths will be open for another 6 hours, but upsets don't come big enough to turn things around now. As Bob Dole headed for the Capitol tonight, though, Republicans were optimistic they may have done well enough in the congressional races to restrain and control a re-elected President Clinton. James Mates, News at 10, Washington.
So tonight, all the indications are that Bill Clinton is heading for a second term. Although only 2 years ago, he appeared in deep trouble, way behind in the polls with a hostile Republican Congress and under the cloud of financial and sexual scandals. So how did the president turn it around?
28 cents to change, $1, $2, $3.
Americans re-elect their presidents in times of peace and prosperity, and the turnover in the big shopping centers is only one of the pointers to an economic boom. When people feel good about the economy, they spend more, and President Clinton takes the credit for that. Inflation and unemployment are down, and economic growth is steady.
This country is moving in the right direction.
It's been the president's persistent theme in his speeches around the country. And in the dying hours of the campaign, His chief spokesman, Mike McCurry, told me it was the main reason for Mr. Clinton's success.
In many ways, the key thing in this election is when we saw a turn in confidence in the American people in the economy, consumer confidence up, some sense that maybe we could keep this robust economic performance going. Once that happened, and it happened fairly late, almost in the summer, I think it really began to secure the election victory that I suspect will be President Clinton's.
My job as president is to take care of the American people.
With the help of stirring images on glossy television commercials, Mr. Clinton has also tried to reinvent himself and to move decidedly to the political center. David Gergen, who worked for the Republican Ronald Reagan and in the Clinton White House, says that's been important too.
Well, the move to the center that you see in Bill Clinton is very similar, of course, to what Tony Blair has been trying to do with the Labor Party. And that is a recognition that the old government top-down solutions were increasingly stale in the public mind and that one had to be more innovative.
The president's move to the center will continue to be tested here on Capitol Hill because there's a growing perception across this country that Democrats and Republicans will have to work together to secure America's future.
With me now is one of America's leading political analysts, Thomas Mann. Mr. Mann, victory for the president, is it big enough?
Well, he may well fall short of his personal goal of 50% of the popular vote, but there's some appropriateness to that. If the president were to win a landslide, he might imagine he were in a commanding position in the American political system, and certainly he is not.
What can we learn about the possible direction of a second term?
I think we can learn by looking at the congressional races. The House and the Senate contest make an enormous difference. The odds are the Republicans are going to hold their majority in the Senate, maybe even pick up some seats, and possibly hold their majority in the House as well, although losing some seats there. That means the president is going to have to scratch for every legislative achievement he is to realize during the next 4 years. He has succeeded by moving to the center. The Republicans have been chastised for being too conservative, too radical. I think we're going to have a period of tough negotiating very much in the center of American politics.
Was Bob Dole the wrong man for the wrong time?
Well, I think he was a weak candidate. He certainly wasn't visionary or articulate, but the reality is that this election was largely a referendum on Bill Clinton. And he passed that referendum. The American people are comfortable with having him in office 4 more years, but he's got to keep providing the prosperity, and he's got to continue to demonstrate he can work with Republicans and hew to the center.
Very quickly, what kind of campaign was this?
Well, most people were bored by the campaign because it was so stable for 9 months, not much of a change. The only change we really got was in the last weeks of the campaign when campaign finance emerged as an issue. But underneath the presidential race was the drama of hotly contested races for the House and the Senate. Americans may be bored, but it was exciting.
Mr. Mann, thank you very much indeed. That's all from Washington for now. For the rest of the day's news, back to London and to Julia Somerville.
Thank you, Trevor.
Americans have been going to the polls. Decision 96.
America is deciding who it will send to the White House for the next 4 years. The most powerful elected office in the world, the President of the United States. Good evening from the Lafayette Center in Washington on this election night. The early results in the presidential elections are looking reasonably good for President Clinton. The latest news is that he may have taken Florida with its 25 votes from the Republicans. If President Clinton does win tonight, he becomes only the second president, or the first president, I should say, since Roosevelt in 1944 to take the presidency for a second time as a Democrat. And certainly right through the campaign, he's had the edge over the Republican Bob Dole, his rival. But his hands may be tied by the other election, which we'll be watching tonight, the election to Congress, to the Senate and to the House of Representatives. That's been in the hands of the Republicans for the past 2 years. They've shown how they can frustrate the intentions of a president by voting against him and by changing his policies. So over the next few hours, we're going to bring you results from both Congress and from the presidency. We're going to discuss the implications, not only for the United States, but for the rest of the world, powerful influence this country has over other people's politics. We're going to be talking to politicians, we're going to be talking to commentators, and we're going to be talking to some voters. Now, President Clinton himself went to the polls with his daughter Chelsea there on the right, too young to vote at 16, his wife Hillary behind in Little Rock in Arkansas today, after campaigning right up to the end, the place where he was governor. And Bob Dole and Elizabeth Dole emerging from behind the blue curtain. They voted in Russell, Kansas, after this rather gimmicky last 96 hours of campaigning for the Republican presidency. He wore himself out and his voice went by the end. A huge electorate. We're looking at Hollywood in California, where it is still daylight. There are 4 time zones here. There are 200 million people or so entitled, if they choose, to vote, and they've got another 4 hours before the polls close over there. Well, as these results start coming in, Peter Snow will be illustrating them and explaining their significance.
And David, no doubt the staff in the White House are as keen as we are to know who's going to be there for the next 4 years. The race is on. Perhaps 90 million people will vote will have voted today in America for this decision about how to change the map from how it looked last time in 1992. 33 states for Clinton, 18 states for George Bush that time. And first indications are really quite interesting. These 2 states closed their polling just about 45 minutes ago. Kentucky, which is a bellwether state, tends to go with the president each time. Clinton won it last time. It's too close to call, the exit polls suggest. Indiana, a loyal Republican state, also too close to call. As David said, Florida, a state that went with George Bush last time, that's why it's blue here, looks like going for Clinton this time. New Hampshire and Vermont, not surprisingly, are going to stick with Clinton this time. That's the way they were last time. That's all the first indications. We'll know a little more in about 10 minutes' time. So that's the presidency. What about Congress? Well, now, the House of Representatives, 435 representatives from all over America, are elected each 2 years. They stand each 2 years for election. Last time, in the mid-term elections of 1994, the Republicans, for the first time in 44 years, won control of the House of Representatives and the Senate, incidentally. They've done that rather more frequently. 38, the majority was there. Can the Democrats overthrow that this time, or would people like Clinton to be president, but to have a Republican Congress? David.
Thanks very much, Peter. Well, I'll have a number of guests here during the evening, and I'll introduce them in a moment, but also with us a cross-section of the American voting public, an audience made up of students and of the retired sitting here in the studio with us, people from the right and the centre, and we'll be talking to them about their reactions as events unfold. We also have our own surfer of the internet in the corner of the studio. This is one of the first elections that's really been discussed endlessly, perhaps somewhat tediously, by the nerds on the internet. But anyway, tonight they're still at it, and our own surfer is going to come up with any information he can about what they're saying to each other. And one other thing, if you want to take part in this program, if you want to comment on what we're saying or what any of my guests say, or you want to ask us questions, whether you are in Britain or whether you're in one of the many countries around the world watching us tonight on BBC World, this is our website, our email address. It's on the screen, uselection@bbc.co.uk. Just once more, uselection@bbc.co.uk, right up to the minute. So the question is what we should be looking out for tonight. Our reporters are right round this country. We're in all the key places. We hope to talk to some of the key people. Bill Turnbull is in Little Rock in Arkansas. What's going on down there, Bill? Bill Turnbull is looking to the heavens to hear my voice and clearly can't hear us at the moment. I think Brian Barron may be able to, however. Let's try Brian Barron. He's at the Republican National Committee here in Washington. Brian, what's the mood down there? Have they got an inkling of what's happening?
David, if the Florida result is confirmed, hardens up for Clinton. Obviously, it's an early body blow for the Republicans. But in fact, the curtain is rising ever so slowly at what is billed as the Republican victory party. There's no spin doctors in sight, only low-level apparatchiks who just don't want to speculate, because the polls are still open in the middle of the United States and also on the West Coast. So there's a very cautious reaction here, but people have been so sandbagged in the party by adverse polls over the last few weeks that that Florida result won't really come as a surprise to those in the party who've kept track on this Dole campaign. David?
What news of Bob Dole? He's himself coming there, is he, later on?
Yes, he spent the day in his hometown in Kansas, and we're expecting him here in about 2 or 3 hours' time. But the party has carefully scheduled his speech, his remarks, which may of course be conceding victory to Bill Clinton, not until after the polls close on the West Coast, and that's about 4 hours from now. So that's when we're anticipating the former senator will appear before us.
And this, of course, is because he wants to get the best possible vote out from the Republicans for Congress, even if he's lost the presidency.
Yes, I mean, I think that's the major consolation prize, isn't it? If the polls are confirmed as being correct in their adverse readings all these weeks, then the consolation prize for the Republicans has to be retaining control of both houses of Congress, and it would be a pretty handsome consolation prize, I think, for them.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. Our chief North American correspondent, Gavin Esler, is at the White House tonight. He's been following the campaign right through. What is your conclusion tonight as you watch these first results come in? How do you think the campaign influenced things?
Gone for Clinton, and we could easily be talking about a landslide. I went with him there 4 years ago. He was desperate to win it then. He just failed. If he has won it tonight, then he succeeded in convincing many of the older voters who retired to Florida that Medicare really was under threat, and maybe even Social Security was under threat, the so-called Mediscare, as Bob Dole characterized it. The other things you've been talking about, Kentucky. Kentucky's an odd state because it's a tobacco-growing state, and there really is a lot of resentment there among people who owe their livelihood to either growing tobacco or processing it about this administration's policies on tobacco. So that may explain why it's a very close-run thing tonight. And Indiana should safely be put away for Bob Dole, and if you're right in saying it's very, very close, too close to call, again, then we could be talking about a Clinton landslide.
Gavin, thanks so much. We'll be hearing from you through the evening as these results come in for your comments on them. Well, so what should we be looking at when these results first come through? Peter, can you talk us through the key factors?
Sure thing, David. Well, here are the states in 1992, 33 of them red for Clinton, 18 of them blue for George Bush last time. And of course, Bob Dole's job was to try and consolidate support that he got in these big, important voting power states like Texas and Florida, and then to try and get himself up here into the Midwest, states like Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, and so on, and perhaps California. But the polls are suggesting something rather different. First of all, let's look at the Kentucky story. We've had Gavin telling us that Kentucky, the bluegrass state, is the state where the tobacco is grown. That may be an important factor here. Johnson won it in '64, Carter won it in '76. Notice each time the winner is the person who becomes president in Kentucky. It's a very good bellwether state. Gives you an idea who's going to win the presidency. This time, Clinton won it last time in 1992. This time, it's still too close to call, something like 55 minutes after the polls close, and they've counted up the exit poll. So if Kentucky, the bluegrass state, where they grow the tobacco, is thinking again about Clinton, that's quite interesting. But it could, as Gavin said, be a special case. Now, let me just show you what the opinion polls are suggesting is actually happening. And there's a little bit of information in here from the exit polls as well. The map is still pretty blue for Dole. According to the opinion polls, it's not going to be a Clinton landslide at all. True, Florida, which does look like going for Clinton, the opinion polls think was going for Clinton too. But notice here that Tennessee, too close to call in the opinion polls. Kentucky as well. Montana, Colorado, some grays there, suggesting that funny things are happening in states which Clinton won last time. Now, what matters is not winning a majority of the states, but winning the states with the voting power. And this is how it works. California has a population of 31 million people. Wyoming, the smallest and least populous of the American states, has a population of 500,000. It would clearly be absurd if they both had the same voting power. So what they do in America is they give them what are called electoral votes. Don't forget that. It's the most important word this evening, or two words this evening. 54 in California, 3 in Wyoming. if you win the share of the vote, even by one vote in California, you take all of California's 54 electoral votes, total 538. California, then, is 10% of the entire number of electoral votes. So look at the voting power of that one state. Now, here is a picture, again, of the country, with, on it, the 7 biggest states in terms of voting power. Starting with California, which, as we've already mentioned, is 54. Then it goes New York, 33. Next most important, Texas, 32. Then Florida, just coming up in a few moments' time, 25. Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Ohio. Here's what happened last time in these big 7 states. All these states, more than 20 electoral votes. Bush won Texas, Bush won Florida. What then is Dole's challenge? It is to make sure that he wins not just the ones that Bush won before, but to try and build up support to win Illinois and Ohio. It looks terribly unlikely, but without 4 of these big 7, people don't win the presidency. David?
Well, we've got polls closing at 7 o'clock here in Washington, including the Florida one, so we'll bring you those results as soon as we get them. Let me, in the meantime, introduce my guests here and have a quick round from them about what they are expecting from this election. First of all, Representative Pat Schroeder. She's the longest-serving woman in the House of Representatives, Democrat from Colorado, and on the liberal wing of the party. Sitting next to her, well-known face Oliver North, the man, of course, who was at the center of channeling secret funds to the Nicaraguan Contras, from arms to Iran, who stood as a Republican in Virginia last time round for the Senate, and now has his own radio talk show, very popular right-wing Republican. Elizabeth Drew from Washington here, a distinguished commentator on political affairs here in the capital city, and the author of a number of books about this presidency and previous presidencies, writing a book at the moment about power, and Charles Wheeler, who has covered many of these elections and watched this one closely. Could I start with you, Pat Schroeder? What does this election campaign tell us about the mood of the American people?
Well, first of all, I think it's very interesting that you have Oliver North and I next to each other. I think he declared me, exactly, but he declared me one of the 24 most dangerous people in America or something, so I'm delighted to be here. What does it tell us about the mood?
Do you think he is too, one of the most dangerous men?
No, I think he's charming and kind.
I sent her roses when she decided to retire.
Absolutely. He can't wait for me to get out of here.
Okay, come back to the election, because we've only got a few moments before we get Florida.
I think what's really happened is it almost looks like the American people have decided that no government is good government. So if you have a Democratic president and then you have a check in the House and Senate, it kind of stalls everything and it guarantees a very long debate before anything really moves.